Hello, I'm Inyeop Kim from KAIST. Today, I want to talk about the challenges users face in user-centric context-aware systems designed for digital well-being interventions. Advancements in technology have enabled services that offer interventions based on user context to promote well-being behaviors. In various domains, including digital well-being and alcoholism, many context-aware intervention systems have been proposed. Recently, context-aware systems have considered a user-centric approach to address the diverse user needs. Through user-centric context-aware systems, users can define system behaviors that align with their goals, and the system will execute the defined actions within specified context. People using user-centric context-aware systems start with personal goals. For instance, someone aiming to reduce social media use, they then detail these goals into specific actions, like deciding not to browse social media at the library. Through the system's interface, these actions become rules like disable social media apps in the library. One of the most well-known models describing how users and systems interact is Norman's model. It explains the process of user interactions with a system. However, there's a limit to using it for explaining interactions in user-centric context-aware systems. So we extended Norman's model to better explain how users interact with user-centric context-aware system. Our model mainly consists of two cycles. The instant evaluation cycle is about the process of setting up the system's operations as a rule. On the other hand, the delayed evaluation refers to the interactions between the users and the systems when the defined operations actually happen. Let's start with the instant evaluation cycle. Here the user has a specific goal. Then, user sets specific actions, or what we call implementation intentions, to achieve their goals. Then, users translate their implementation intentions into rules using the system interface. However, if the system doesn't accommodate conditions users want, users might come to interpret that the system falls short of supporting their needs, leading them to perceive a gap. Finally, users might conclude that as things stand, achieving their goal is difficult. Therefore, to address the perceived gap, users might consider revising implementation intentions. Then, users will try to express their new intentions as rules again. The instance evaluation cycle involves repeatedly addressing perceived gaps until they can establish the desired rules. After users define a rule through the instant evaluation cycle, there's a process for them to evaluate if the rule was well defined. This evaluation is delayed because the rule's execution is postponed until the specific context is satisfied. Users assess if the rule operates as intended when rules are actually in action. For example, if someone set a rule to block social media notification in the library, they might realize the real issue isn't the notifications, but their habit of opening social media apps. This leads to recognizing a gap between their goals and the actual effectiveness of the rule. Users might judge a rule as not fitting their goals and go through the process of adjusting and resetting it. This delayed evaluation cycle is the process of addressing gaps between the effect they expected and the actual operation of the rule. During both the instant and delayed evaluation cycles, users might perceive gaps between their expectations and the system operations. These user system gaps are inherent because their needs are diverse and evolve over time, and sometimes technological limits can't fully support user needs. This creates significant challenges in delivering user-centric context-aware systems. So we set our research goals to understand how users perceive and address gaps while using user-centric context-aware systems. We came up with two research questions for exploring the instance and delayed evaluation cycles. Various context-aware intervention systems have been proposed to enhance digital well-being. Also, it's known that for enhancing digital well-being, users have diverse and complex implementation intentions. Therefore, we decided this domain is suitable for investigating gaps due to the potential larger user system gaps. To investigate user system gaps, we carried out 3 studies. In the system implementation phase, we conducted a technical review to analyze the user requirements and technological feasibility. We then developed a user-centric context-aware systems designed for digital well-being interventions. During our lab study, we explored how users perceive and address gaps while programming their implementation intentions as rules. Finally, in the field study, we looked into how users perceive and address gaps when their defined rules were executed in the real-world context. Here is the system implementation part. We explored how context action rules could be technically supported. We examined context action rules used in prior work. These rules were written by users in natural language to enhance digital well-being. For instance, a set of rules included: if I am in a library, silence all notifications. In our technical review, we derived guidelines on technically supporting 3 main elements. First, we identified the needs to support conditions for rule execution. We found users may set conditions based on location, time, and activity. And the system should allow users to clearly define these conditions for better execution. Additionally, we concluded that offering generic context conditions to allow users to describe a broad range of scenarios. Regarding actions, we discovered users may require 3 types of actions: limiting phone use, handling external notifications, and changing the phone state. Lastly, about releasing conditions, it is crucial to clearly define when actions should be released to avoid confusion. Based on these findings, we developed a system named Focus8. This is the interface of Focus8. Users can set conditions for triggering actions based on location, time, and activity. Focus8 supports setting actions like restricting app usage, handling notifications, and altering the phone's state. Focus8 also provided users with a detailed explanation of the rules. Users could see when and what action would be executed, and when it would be released. Moreover, it offered functions for managing rules. After developing Focus8, we conducted a lab study to understand how users perceive and address gaps while setting rules. We recruited 12 participants from 2 universities and conducted one-on-one sessions. After learning how to use Focus8, participants programmed various rules used in our technical review. In first interviews, we asked how they perceived gaps during rule programming, how they addressed these gaps, and why. After our lab study, we identified 2 uncertainties that impact how users perceive and address gaps. First, context mapping uncertainty arises from the challenges of aligning users' irregular daily routines with given context conditions. This issue stems from the system's limitations in supporting the representation of dynamic context as context action rules. Second, context recognition uncertainty relates to ambiguity in the system's operational mechanism. This is often due to users' limited understanding of technology and incorrect assumptions about system behaviors. To address context mapping uncertainty, users explored alternative context conditions. For instance, One user finding it hard to predict their study times chose to set their primary study location as the condition instead of time. Additionally, users attempt to find the bare minimum necessary for guaranteeing their desired situation. For example, to set a conditions for sleeping, one user defined at least the hours they are typically asleep as the condition. To address context mapping uncertainty, participants try to find alternative ways to represent their desired situations. However, users who lacked technical background often had a low confidence in their rule, sometimes leading to invalid rules. In fact, some found rule creation so challenging that they decided to abandon it. We also carried out a field study to explore how users perceive and address gaps in real-world conditions. We recruited 46 participants and had them install Focus 8 on their phones. They were encouraged to freely create and manage rules over a 3-week period. Afterward, we conducted surveys and interviews to inquire about experiences of using a Focus 8 and how they managed their rules throughout the study. Here are statistics of created rules. Participants created about 3 rules on average, with diverse scenarios and options for managing their smartphone use. During everyday situations, users encountered gaps when their rules were executed, and they tried to address these gaps. For example, users perceived a gap when the restriction level of actions for interventions differed from their initial expectations. They continued adjusting their intervention rules until they found the right level of restrictions that matched their needs. Moreover, users perceived gap when their overall circumstances changed, because their existing rules no longer suited their changed situations. We observed that participants planned their daily routines by setting up rules, yet sometimes they encountered difficulties in following these plans. In such cases, users adjusted the context conditions within the rules to make them more workable. Lastly, users showed a tendency to delete rules when the perceived gap was significantly larger than expected. Also, they removed rules when they felt those rules were no longer necessary. To wrap up our study, we explored the nature of interactions between users and user-centric context-aware systems. Our paper discusses various aspects. We talk about how to support users' diverse needs considering technical feasibility and offer a user-centric context-aware intervention system. We also discuss how to address the uncertainties users face while setting rules. And finally, how to maintain the effectiveness of user-centric context-aware interventions over time. Our study advances the understanding of user interactions within user-centric context-aware systems, extending existing interaction models. Our work shed light on significant challenges within digital wellbeing, offering essential insight for future research in developing user-centric context-aware systems. Thank you.